well-known institution, organization released a report on this topic quite recently. And I also understand that Professor Wilkinson, was a member of the council's team to make the report. Perhaps we can chat a little bit about it in the discussion section if anyone asks a question. And also another area, which is a topic of our seminar today, also attracting attention of many people, is a field called in vitro gametogenesis. In short, IVG research. And our team in Osaka University has started a new project, G-STEP, which I will explain later on. But actually, one of the members, Professor Michinori Saito of Kyoto University, Japan, we being in our project, has attended a meeting organized by our colleague today, which is the project, the Future of Human Reproduction Project. And he told us that there is a project in UK, which is looking at the same area. And the project is led by Professor Stefan Wilkinson. So I contacted the team, and we want to interact a little bit more, and therefore we decided to hold a seminar. So thank you very much for the UK colleague, the project of Professor Wilkinson. And we will hear today talks about the two projects, and then have plenty of time for discussion, hopefully. So thank you for joining, and let's start the seminar. Thank you. Yeah, so Lena, we didn't show the program, but it's okay, right?
It's okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So the
25 minutes or so by Steve, Professor Wilkinson, and then my team will talk about the G-STEP project.
Thank you.
Then we will have 30-40 minutes of discussion time. Reina, can you?
Okay. Thank you, Professor Kato. Let's move on to our first presentation. And we are pleased to welcome our speaker from Lancaster University, Dr. Stephen Wilkinson and Dr. Nicola Williams, as well as Dr. Lola O'Donovan from University of Sheffield. They will discuss the future of human reproduction and reproductive projects. Could you please start? Maybe Stefan.
We lost
Stefan. We lost Steve.
I try and kind of start off for him in that case. So yeah, thank you all for inviting us to speak at this event. We were very happy to accept the invitation. I'm really excited to listen to what you've all been doing on this topic as well. So the title of our presentation today is Ethical, Legal and Social Implications of In Vitro Gametogenesis. And it's a piece of work that we're currently undertaking as part of a Wellcome-funded grant called the Future of Human Reproduction, which uses interdisciplinary research methods to explore the ethical, legal and social questions that are raised by kind of novel advances in reproduction, so things like ectogenesis, in vitro gametogenesis, and gene editing. So yeah, as I just said, this is an innovative and interdisciplinary research programme that's funded by a £1 million Wellcome Research Development Award that explores the cultural, ethical, legal and social challenges that will emerge as technological advances fundamentally change the possibilities for human reproduction. And as part of our group, we've got a number of scholars from a number of different disciplines. So contributing to this research are scholars from bioethics, from design, from English literature, law, linguistics, psychology, and philosophy more generally. And we have 7 investigators on the project, 4 project staff and 2 research collaborators. We also held a small grant holder and visiting researcher scheme, which provided some really useful insights into kind of some more narrow topics in this area. And there's also an expert advisory group that we consult with quite often to discuss our research. So over the course of this research grant, we've primarily been exploring kind of the interdisciplinary questions raised by 3 different technologies. And so these are ectogenesis, in vitro gametogenesis, and genome editing. And I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Steve Wilkinson, who can maybe tell you a little bit more about these.
Yes, I hope you can hear me okay. I'm having terrible technical problems. I'll try and say we've just got as far as the 3. I guess we've done stuff before. So the topic aims to get some project into the research themes, with emerging biotechnology. So ectogenesis, which is the creation of artificial womb environments in which we might gestate partially or fully, i.e., either part of pregnancy or from creating the embryo. In vitro gametogenesis, IVG, which we're going to say quite a bit about later on, but it's needs creating either sperm or eggs from other bodily cells, such as skin cells or other part of the reproductive organs. New ways of making eggs and sperm. And finally, genome editing in a reproductive about modifying embryos, modifying eggs, or other sort of early infants would change the pathway for people. So I think we're on to the next slide. And is it okay? You okay sound-wise, Sabina? Okay? Yeah. I think we can move on. Right. So briefly about some of the background. So this doesn't work on in vitro gametogenesis IVG. It's definitely not sort of in the background, and we should name check this earlier work. So in 2015, the field by Anna and Daniela on artificial gametes, as they were called at the time, and that's well worth a look. That's on the website. My first work on this, of Nicola as well, was under a workshop that we did in as part of Wellcome funded with Professor Rodman's. So we did on that as part of an earlier project. And then most recently, we've been thinking about the policy raised by IVG and have held workshops of our own, one in London in 2023, which is collaborating with the Field Council on Bioethics, and a slide in broaden things down. Look at European context. So, please. So we are working on a policy briefing note with colleagues. Our colleague Rand, who's policy manager there. And this has taken quite a long while to put together. It's sort of in the close. It's going to be out as the first half of 2025. As the council's been working on other things. IVGs. That's work. So the paper that we're doing outlines the scientific, ethical, and legal issues raised by IVG. And what we're trying to do really there is lay out a series of questions and issues that would need by policymakers before this became for use, not so much just in research, but also in human reproduction practice and legal issues that we rate. And we aren't making very strong propensity apart from really the policymakers consider in order to so next slide.
Sorry, Steve, I have a little difficulty of listening to you.
Oh, okay.
Perhaps you can put the video off, though I don't want
The video,
to
yeah, I can try that. Yeah. Sure. I'm handing over to Nicola now anyway, so I'll turn the video off.
Okay, right. Thank you.
Yeah, so just so before we begin talking about some of the ethical questions that are raised by in vitro gametogenesis, I just want to briefly give you a quick introduction to the science for anyone who's not familiar with it. So gametogenesis is the process by which early embryonic stem cells develop into mature gametes, so eggs and sperm that are capable of fertilization. And in vitro gametogenesis, or IVG, aims to replicate this process outside of the human body in order to produce in vitro derived gametes. So key steps to enable research into IVG included the discovery of a process to derive pluripotent stem cells from embryos in vitro in 1998, followed by the announcement in 2007 of a method to reprogram somatic cells, so cells from the adult body that do not have reproductive potential, such as skin cells, to a state of pluripotency, producing induced pluripotent stem cells. The process of directing these cells to specialize into germ cells and then into mature eggs and sperm has so far been most successful in mice, using both embryonic and induced pluripotent stem cells. In 2023, a study reported conversion of a small number of male mouse somatic cells into female cells and the subsequent development of mature eggs. Now, these eggs were fertilized, resulting in the birth of healthy and fertile offspring, although only just over 1% of the embryos created resulted in the birth of pups. So recently, an alternative approach to IVG was reported, which uses somatic cell nuclear transfer, a technique involving the insertion of genetic material from a somatic cell into an egg which has had its genetic material removed. So while research in this area is developing at a rapid pace, there is no consensus on the likelihood of successfully using IVG in human reproduction, nor on when that might occur. However, if and when IVG research bears fruit, in vitro-derived gametes may be used in numerous ways. So outside of the arena of human reproduction, for example, we might use these gametes for research purposes to increase knowledge regarding how gametes develop, the processes involved in gene expression, as well as for purposes such as agricultural and livestock breedings, as well as de-extinction and conservation efforts. Within the arena of human reproduction, however, in vitro-derived gametes may be used in three main ways, and I'm going to explore these in turn for you now. So first among these is the potential for IV gametes to transform gamete donation and procurement practices by potentially reducing demand for donated gametes, enabling clinics to create gametes from patients' own cells instead of relying on a donor. And this could prove beneficial in a number of ways, such as through reducing the harms, risks, and thorny ethical questions that are associated with oocyte donation, overcoming shortages of donor eggs and sperm, reducing the likelihood of cases where gametes from particular donors are overutilized as a result of poor registration and tracking procedures, and also allowing those who seek it to ensure genetic relatedness with their future offspring, something which cannot be achieved through the use of donor gametes. It should, however, be noted that should somatic cell nuclear transfer become the preferred method of deriving IV gametes, demand for donor eggs could well go up or remain the same. A second possible way in which IVG might be used in the reproductive context is to increase the reproductive choices and opportunities that are available to those whose reproductive goals cannot be met by existing reproductive technologies. So currently, for example, an estimated 30% of fertility patients are unable to produce viable gametes for reproduction for various reasons. So things like congenital disease, age, and acquired factors, such as injury, gender affirmation surgery and therapy, or certain cancer treatments. And IVG could therefore be used by people whose current options are limited to gamete or embryo donation and adoption, and those who would prefer to have a genetic link with their children. So IVD gametes could also help those who are undergoing procedures that threaten fertility, such as radiotherapy and chemotherapy for cancer, or gender affirmation therapy and surgery, offering an alternative to fertility preservation treatments such as egg, sperm, or embryo freezing. Patients might well be reassured by the existence of this option, as it will reduce the need to make difficult decisions about fertility preservation in the context of serious and aggressive disease. We can also note that a number of the ethical concerns that are associated with fertility preservation for prepubertal children and adolescents might similarly be alleviated when these decisions don't have to be made so early in a patient's life. Additionally, IVG could enable people of any sex to produce both sperm and eggs for reproductive purposes. And in theory, this could mean that both members of same-sex couples could be their child's genetic parents. Transgender women could contribute eggs and transgender men's sperm for reproduction. And individuals could create both eggs and sperm for solo reproductive and multiplex parenting projects. Finally, there's also the possibility that we could use IVG for selective reproductive purposes, allowing for the expansion of pre-implantation genetic testing programs. So the ability to use IVG to create significantly more eggs and consequently embryos than at present, combined with advances in genomics, could allow for the expansion of pre-implantation genetic testing, also known as pre-implantation genetic diagnosis programs. Prospective parents, for example, could be presented with a greater number of embryos to choose from than is currently possible, allied with increasingly specific selection criteria. Scientists might also be able to use IVD gametes to employ selection techniques over multiple generations of embryos in a relatively short space of time, with the goal of screening in or out desired or undesired traits in future generations. So what we can see here is that the prospect of in vitro gametogenesis has the potential to significantly transform our reproductive lives, and therefore it raises a number of ethical, legal, and social questions that my colleagues Laura and Steve are going to talk about now.
Great, thanks, Nicola. So I'm going to move us on now from the science and the potential applications of IVG in humans to talk about some of the ethical and legal issues that those uses pose. And it's important to note that addressing some of these concerns requires collaboration and discussion between government, scientists, policymakers, and the public. So there has to be a collective effort here, really, to address these issues. And the approach that we've taken in our policy document, the one Steve was telling you about that we're drafting in collaboration with the Nuffield Council on Bioethics, we've taken a thematic approach. So we looked at the different legal and ethical issues and we've grouped them into various themes. And the first of those themes, as you can see here, is consent and information provision. And so here we're required to consider a number of issues. So firstly, what is required for valid consent to the creation and use of IVD gametes? For instance, we have to consider what type of consent is appropriate and what should be required. For example, a general consent versus specific consent, or revocable consent or irrevocable. And we need to consider for what purposes that consent should be required. Secondly, we need to consider whether existing consent frameworks, so the frameworks we have in our legal systems, whether these frameworks for gamete or tissue donation are sufficient in the context for IVG. So can those consent frameworks be extended to cover this particular context, or might new consent frameworks be required? Thirdly, we also have to consider whether amendments to existing legislative regulatory frameworks might be required to ensure protection against the non-consensual use of IVD gametes. So one of the worries that's been articulated in the ethical literature is the possibility of gamete theft. So in this context, that would be tissue samples being taken without consent, skin cells, for example, to create IVD gametes. So we have to think about whether our existing legal frameworks are capable of dealing with these sorts of issues. And then concerning information provision, it will need to be decided whether children who are created via IVG using donor cells should have the same access to information as existing donor-conceived people. So are the two contexts the same? And if not, sort of what might those differences be and how should they be dealt with by the law? Next slide, please, Nicola. The next issue that we have to consider is the status of IVD gametes and embryos. And so prior to any research or reproductive use of these gametes and embryos, two issues have to be determined. The first issue we need to address is whether IVD gametes and embryos created from those gametes, do they have the same moral status as other gametes and embryos? And will they or should they be subject to the same legal provisions? And therefore, do they merit the same level of respect and protection in the law? So, for example, the 14-day rule. That's a rule that we have in our legislation, many other countries do as well, that prohibits embryo research beyond that period of 14 days. Is an IVD embryo the same? Does it merit that same level of protection? That's something we have to consider. The second issue we need to consider is what the permitted uses of IVD gametes, back a slide please, of IVD gametes and any resulting embryos are. So Nicola mentioned some potential uses. Multiplex parenting, for example, that's a situation where you might have 3 or more people genetically related to a child. Should that be a permitted use? There's also been some discussion in the ethical literature about solo reproduction, though of course there are, I guess, some serious scientific concerns there with regards to genetic defects, where it's just one person who might be creating both gametes. So at present, IVG for research purposes, it is permitted under UK law. However, IVD eggs, IVD sperm, and embryos created from IVD eggs and sperm, they wouldn't be permitted to be used in treatment. So it would be illegal at present to create those gametes and eggs and use them in fertility treatment. And we would need to amend our legislation before this could happen. So that's something that our regulators, our government, our policymakers are going to have to think very carefully about. Next slide, please. So any proposal to use IVD gametes for reproductive purposes will inevitably raise questions about safety and the well-being of the children that are created in this way, and balancing the potential benefits of reproductive uses that Nicola mentioned earlier against the short and the long-term risks for the welfare of children created. This requires consideration of 4 key points. Firstly, we have to consider the point at which IVD gametes are deemed safe enough to begin human trials. And so in order to answer that question, when is this technology safe enough, we have to consider things like the size of initial trials, how many people should be involved, how those trials are designed, whether there's going to be any long-term follow-up studies, for example. So as with any new reproductive technology, there may be risks to the children created as a direct result of the use of the technology itself. Or there might be indirect consequences because of legal and social responses to the technology. So we have to consider all of this in the round. We also have to consider how much evidence is required in order to determine that IVD gametes are sufficiently safe and effective. We need to ask ourselves how much risk and what kinds of risk are acceptable in this context in order to move to human application. And how should such risk be balanced against the benefits that the use of IVG for reproduction will provide? We also have to consider whether any legal safeguards might be required. For example, as part of that informed consent process, what degree of information provision should be needed? And finally, we have to consider what follow-up studies should be put in place and for how long. We have to consider, for example, whether there should be an international registry to record data on child outcomes. Now, that's something we've seen in another context, in the context of uterus transplantation, for example. Next slide, please. So as Nicola mentioned earlier, one possible benefit of creating IVD gametes is the prospect of increasing the reproductive options for people who want to have their own biologically created children. And these possibilities raise important questions. Some of them are practical, and they relate to the safety and the welfare of children, as I've just mentioned. But other questions are more ethical or social in character. So, for example, some of these questions regard whether the creation and use of IVD gametes might disrupt established notions of family and parenthood in negative ways. Or, conversely, might they serve to further entrench existing geneticist views and understandings of parenthood? So, for example, could IVG entrench the view that being genetically related to a child is somehow better than other arrangements, like adoption, for example? And that might be the case if a lot of public resources are put into researching and providing IVD gamete services within healthcare systems. If, for example, eggs are created from the cells of a male human, or sperm is created from the cells of a female human, or older menopausal women use IVD gametes to have a genetically related child, then traditional notions of family or parenthood might be challenged. And using IVD gametes would allow 3 or more people to be a child's genetic parents too. And these possibilities, they pose ethical questions, but they also pose a number of questions for the existing law and regulatory arrangements that govern legal parenthood. So how we identify who is someone's mother and who is someone's father in English law, for example. And this includes questions such as, does our current law appropriately reflect who a child's legal parents are, or who a child's legal parents should be? What types of family building should be permitted? For example, should multiplex parenting, allowing 3 or more people to be genetically related to a child, should that be permitted? And how should we attribute parenthood? Who will be the legal mother and father with responsibility for the child? Should we have a situation where we enable more than 2 people to be legal parents, for example? We also have to consider what the legal basis for parenthood should be. Should it be genetics? Should it be intention? Should it be for motherhood? Should it be the fact of birth? That's how we currently govern motherhood in the UK. And we also have to ask ourselves whether the development of IVG might reinforce calls to reform the laws on legal parenthood in the UK more broadly. So I'm going to hand over to Steve now, who's going to take you through some of the remaining ethical and legal issues.
Thank you very much. So I'm just going to pick up on two further issues already been briefly mentioned. So the first one, which Nicola alluded to earlier, is that IVG could be used to Hank really famously comes from easy PG pre-implantation notice, which he posits could be a consequence of IVG in practice. So, as Nicola mentioned earlier, the idea would be if it becomes a lot easier to create eggs and sperm, to create embryos, and the scope for things within those embryos then becomes great. And then in terms of the ethical issues, the first thing to say, if we have the next slide, is that these issues are not new or unique. Could we have some of the next? Yes, these issues are already discussed in the forum. We already have PGD. We already have various ways of cancer. The point is that IVD, or at least one IVG, level, and very often with these technologies, it's the sort of ubiquitous availability. The questions that are liable to be asked are, what the of embryos for a few generations? Is this going to change the nature of humanity in the medium or long term? Might some of this have problematically eugenic purposes or effects, and will there be negative effects, either symbolic or tangible, on or future people with these genetic and will this sort of selection be used for things that are unrelated to health? For example, will it become possible to use part of cosmetic enhancements with health, and that's often a concern around enhancement. As I say, these are familiar issues from the context. They're much more pressing and put them on scale. Okay, so moving on to funding and access. Main issue, well, there's an issue about, probably say more about funding than about access. There are some access issues about future government. Focus here on public funding and funding health systems. So there's already quite a controversy in many countries about what reproductive services be funded by public funded health services and who should get those, and so on. That's already a contentious. And IVG would sort of just add to that and just give us a whole it wouldn't be a brand new issue, but it would be a new way of prompting us to think carefully about the principles underlying funding. So moving on, the actual issues that I think are likely to come up here are as follows. Let me just get my notes, sorry. Okay, so at a minimum, funding for IVG is going to have to be requirements and any other reproductive health service, so it's going to have to be as effective as so on as any other ART. But there are some interesting questions in the case of IVG. One of these is, what do we compare it with? So when a publicly funded health service is trying to decide what treatment, it will often have to which one is. Some applications of IVG, this will be straightforward. For example, we're looking at fertility preservation for patients. and compare it with freezing eggs, freezing sperm, freezing embryos, and that will forward. But in other cases, where we're comparing, for example, egg donation or sperm donation with IVG, this forces us to think about some quite difficult questions about what's the value of relatedness. Those people, how do we put a financial value on that? How do we feed that? And this is going to be particularly pressing for types of alternative reproduction, earlier multiplex solo reproduction, and enabling older women. How do we put a value on the genetic relatedness that some of those people want with their families? Do really want families? Okay, so we've used up quite a lot of our time, so I think I'll probably move on to the end of that one. Thank you very much, and I hope you could hear me the last bit there. I have had a terrible tech problem, but let's hope we got it. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your fascinating talk, Steve. We will have our Q&A session later, but if anyone has a quick question now, please use the Q&A button. 日本語で、質問されたい方は、日本語で投稿していただいても構いません。Maybe if there are no immediate questions, let's proceed to the next presentation. Okay. Our next speaker is Professor Kazuto Kato from Osaka University. He will present on the G-STEP project, Gametogenesis from stem cells and ELSI governance through public involvement. Professor Kato, could you please begin?
Yes, thank you. Yep. I also had quite a few, many questions to the presentations just we heard, but I also hold them to the later discussion time. So I'd like to show my. So Reina, do you see my slide projected?
Yes.
Thank you. So thank you very much. I'm now talking, we'll talk about a G-STEP project, our project. Our project is newer than the one by our UK colleague, and as Reina already pronounced, this is a full name of the project. But we also have this, sorry, I think I forgot to make the pointer appear. Yes, we also have a logo, and this is a full name. And the project is funded by the Research Institute of Science and Technology for Society of Japan Science and Technology Agency, JST. I think JST is relatively well known to the world outside of Japan as well. So I begin by talking about the background of the project, and this has been already partly introduced by our colleagues in UK, but I repeat a little bit. And the field of IVG research is progressing quite rapidly, and in fact, Japanese researchers are leading the field. And the overall state of the research area is still in the basic research, and there are many values of the research, such as elucidating the mechanism of germ cell formation, and also causes of abnormalities, and also potentially improve the assisted reproductive technologies, and also potentially also used by the conservation of endangered species. And as basic research, mice in mice research has progressed quite a lot. And as you see here, mice have been already born from the germ cells created from iPS cells. But in humans, research has been progressing, but not yet functional sperms and oocytes have been yet produced. But this field has attracted big attention last year because eggs were produced from male stem cells. And this is actually research work of our colleague in Osaka University, Katsuhiko Hayashi. And so there are ELSI, ethical, legal, and social issues, both in basic research and potential clinical application. So that's one of the backgrounds. And second background is the need of open discussion on basic research. And many people are already aware that we need to have wide open discussions on the newly emerging technologies. And for example, say regenerative medicine or genetically modified crops, artificial intelligence, there are lots of discussions happening, and also methodologies are also mostly clear. But for the research areas still in the basic research phase, including IVG, some kind of new method is necessary that we think, because number one, difficulty in understanding specialized knowledge exists. And also the actual engagement methodology has not been established well enough. So therefore we so this is ongoing, but how can we promote this activity is still a challenge in many countries, many societies. So we set two objects of the project. And the number one is to analyze ELSI, both for basic research and potential future clinical applications of IVG, and then propose measures for policy making for proper governance of the field in the later stage of the project. And the second one is to find out methods to involve and engage various stakeholders and present the method as a more general methodology that can be used in similar areas. So this is a slide showing you the members of the project, and we have scientists, really the leaders of the field across the world, and they are in Japan. And Katsuhiko Hayashi, who succeeded in producing eggs from male cells in mice, and this is Michinori Saito, who is a pioneer of the field, and Takehiko Ogawa, who is working on the gametogenesis sperm formation from the actual testes taken from, for example, patients. That's a kind of thing he wants to do. And we also have members of working on ELSI and governance, and that's my team. Reina here, Atsushi here, and Daisuke is a research associate. And also we have bioethicist Misao Fujita, and she's a philosopher, Yusuke. And then we have two senior leaders in the actual clinical side. And Tadashi Kimura and Minoru Inohara, they are the leaders of the academic societies of Japan, entire Japan. And also we have public involvement panel, which is a very important partner of the project. So this is a schematic presentation of the work packages, and the work packages consist from number 1 to number 9. And 3 phases. This is the first phase, and we make public involvement panel first, and also in parallel we do gathering of basic information and mapping ELSI, which I will talk about a little bit more in detail in other slides. And then these members of the public involvement panel will work together to do focus group interview and another newly utilized Q-sort method to analyze people's interest and thinking. And so they are the partners of this project. And finally, we will make summary and output for summer for policy making advice, and we also work with them for this phase. So this is a flyer that was used for the recruitment of the public involvement panel. And in Japanese, this is say, we're recruiting the members starting from March 2024. And the message here says, how are we going to make the future? That's the message in the flyer. Detail will be talked about by Atsushi after my talk. So in using this just a little more time, I will introduce work package 3 in two packages. So one is the work by Yuko Muraoka, and she has been analyzing the history of efforts to enact a comprehensive law for assistive reproductive technology in Japan. Actually, it has been unsuccessful. It's a long history. 1983, the first case of an IVG birth was reported in Japan. This is relatively soon after the first one in the UK. And the committee was established in the Ministry of Health and Welfare. And also there was a legislative council which published a report on the draft law, but no law was enacted. And in 2013, again, there was a revival of the activity, and the ruling party, LDP, as well as Komeito, these are the current two ruling parties as well, they established a project on this. And still many things happened. No law enacted. But in 2023, one act on assisted reproductive technology has been enacted. However, this one is about donated sperms and eggs from third party. So it doesn't deal with ART of natural couples. So that is a kind of a specific act at the moment. So what we can discuss, sorry, this is quite brief, but is that repeated efforts over 20 years have not led to enactment of a comprehensive law for ART in Japan. The law enacted in 2020 is only about ART with donated gametes. There's no prospect of including both medical research and clinical aspect of ART in the same regulation. This I emphasize because we are working with medical researchers. And as we know, HFEA deals with the both research side and clinical side, also based on the Human Fertilization and Embryology Authority. That's under the Act, so that's a legal basis for both research and clinical. And some people in Japan says we need this kind of regulation. And finally, the lack of comprehensive regulatory framework in ART may become obstacles for proper development of the IVG research and potential future clinical application. As we have already heard from Steve's group, how to handle these gametes and eggs and how to regulate potential clinical application is an issue that we have to begin to think about. So the current situation is not very good. So we want to analyze and summarize this and talks with many relevant stakeholders. So finally, this is the last slide. Another piece of analysis has been ongoing under the package 3, and I will be quick. So we have IVG research on well, forget about the details, but we have IVF research. And from that, the scientific knowledge is produced. And also some ELSI are coming out, such as use of human gametes and embryos. Also, potentially, hypothetical future clinical implementation may produce some benefits in the assisted reproductive areas, technology areas, but also ELSI will be produced. So we have been mapping this by literature analysis, also media analysis. And what we are seeing at the moment is that the scientific knowledge as basic research, such as creation of oocytes derived from male iPS cells, this is a primary purpose of this research is to understand the mechanism of oocyte formation. That's what Katsuhiko Hayashi says. However, the world reacted like this, talking about expectations and discussions regarding gay couples having genetically related children. So what we hear, this is also, you can see it here in the BBC News, in the frontline page. It says Professor Hayashi is working on developing fertility treatments, which is actually not quite correct, according to what he says. But this is this area. So what we see is maybe this is hype, the intense excitement or exaggerated enthusiasm surrounding a particular scientific idea, discovery, or technology. And it's difficult. It's not easy to say this is hype and this is not hype. But still, if the hype is really too much, there will be a problem because you lose chances to talking about these more carefully by concentrating on this side. So that's a tentative conclusion, one of the conclusions of this analysis from my work, our work. Thank you for your attention. I stop here.
Thank you very much for your insightful talk. Again, if anyone has quick questions, please use the Q&A button. Okay, now let's move on to our final speakers. From Osaka University, we have Dr. Atsushi Kogetsu. He will talk about the public involvement panel of the GSTEP project. Could you please begin?
Okay, thank you very much. Can you see my screen?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
So thank you very much for the introduction. And hello, everyone. My name is Atsushi Kogetsu from Osaka University and Professor Kazuto's research group. It's a great pleasure to be here today to share our experiences with the public involvement panel of the GSTEP project. While the panel's core activities are just getting underway, today I would like to focus on its vision and the experiences we have gained so far. So let me start from the vision of the panel. The panel was created to incorporate public views throughout the project, from designing the surveys to the development of final proposals. The panel works closely with the research team, ensuring the public views are embedded in our work. As Professor Kato explained earlier, the GSTEP project is structured around 9 work packages. The central focus of the panel's activities lies in the middle of the figure, labeled Surveys on the Public Members. However, we aim for the panel to actively contribute not only to this area, but also to the literature surveys, as well as the final outputs, ensuring contributions across all work packages. So far, we have completed activities related to work package 1 and 4, and we are currently engaged in work package 5. Today, I will introduce these activities and present what we have worked on so far. The panel members were recruited between March and June 2024. Announcements were made through the project website, flyers distributed locally, and notifications sent via Osaka University's Kaitokudo mailing list. Initially, the goal was to recruit around 10 members, but we received 35 applications. This was surprising to us as Japan currently lacks established mechanisms for patient and public involvement like the UK. After discussion within the research team and the withdrawal of a few applicants, all remaining 31 individuals were accepted as panel members. This is the demographics of the panel members, and a relatively large proportion of members are in their 50s and 60s, with a slightly higher representation of females, accounting for about 57% of the group. This diverse mix has been instrumental in capturing a wide range of viewpoints. Before the panel's first meeting, we conducted a questionnaire survey to understand the panel members' initial thoughts on IBG research and etc. Prior to this, we sent out a brief explanatory document about IBG, originally prepared for a science cafe to provide foundational knowledge and context to the members. Using Google Forms, we asked questions such as, to what extent do you feel IBG research relates to you? What are your impressions of studying the mechanisms of the beginning of life and cells connecting generations? How would you feel about applying this technology in society? We received responses by almost all the members. This slide showed the distribution of responses to the question, to what extent do you feel IBG research relates to you? Responses follow a roughly normal distribution on the left half, but overall, the results are slightly skewed toward the right, indicating a tendency for panel members to feel that IBG research is somewhat relevant to their lives. While the findings are still preliminary, I would like to share a few key themes about perspectives on basic research of IBG that have emerged from the questionnaire survey. The first one is understanding life and its ethical boundaries. One panel member mentioned this research could reveal the mechanisms of life, challenging our existing values. Another expressed concerns, saying, I believe the beginning of life is something that should not be controlled by human hands. The second one is potential benefits for society and medicine. Respondents noted this research may help us understand the causes of infertility and miscarriage, offering hope to those who experience challenges. This is an important step in developing technologies that will be needed in the future, another remarked. The third one is ensuring responsible research and use of technology. Some will misuse technology, but its development cannot be stopped. Clear laws and regulations are essential to ensure it is used for good, a panel member emphasized. Similarly, 3 themes were identified regarding the societal implications of this technology. The first one is safety, welfare, and social acceptance. It is important to create guidelines involving prospective users, one member pointed out. The safety and welfare of the children born using this technology should always confront another threat. The second one is ethical challenges and potential misuse. A member reflected choices such as which sperm, egg, or embryos to use may raise difficult questions, including how to address hidden eugenic ideologies. Systems to prevent misuse are essential as people may exploit this technology for personal or commercial gain, another added. The last one is opportunities and broader societal impact. One member shared their hopeful perspective. This technology could expand opportunities for diverse families, offering hope to those struggling with infertility. Another member cautioned regulations are crucial to ensure fairness and prevent harm, especially for those who might misuse the technology. So far, I have explained the results of the questionnaire survey conducted with the panel members, but now I would like to introduce some of the specific activities of the panel. In work package 4, titled Learning About Stem Cell Research, we conducted 2 key activities. The first was a mini lecture by Professor Katsuhiko Hayashi, a leading researcher in IBG, who provided an overview of the field. The second one was a recreational workshop using iPS cell culture, a card-based activity aimed at making stem cell research feel more engaging and familiar to them. Through these activities, we hope the panel members felt more connected to basic research, including IBG research. This is last slide. Currently, we are working on work package 5. The first panel meeting of this work package was held 2 weeks ago, and the second is scheduled for the day after tomorrow morning. In this work package, the focus is on discussing the design of the future group interviews, focus group interviews, using explanatory materials shown at the bottom of the slide and scenarios tentatively prepared by the research team. The panel is deliberating on whether these should be used in the focus groups, and if so, how they could be improved. To support these discussions, we conducted a pre-meeting survey using Google Forms to gather initial opinions. Combining this input with group discussions, the panel has been able to engage in meaningful dialogue and explore a variety of perspectives. In conclusion, the public involvement panel activities have just begun, but our experiences so far already demonstrate their importance in bringing diverse perspectives to the forefront of IDG research. These insights have not only enriched our project, but also underscored the ethical and societal complexities of integrating advanced technologies. Thank you for your attention. I welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you so much for your engaging presentation. We will now open the floor for a Q&A and discussion session. So we welcome your questions and comments. So please use the Q&A button. Kindly include your name and affiliation when submitting your queries. 日本語で参加の皆さん、もし、日本語で、ご質問があれば、日本語で入力していただいて構いません。こちらの方で翻訳して、スピーカーの方に伝えますので、日本語で入力しても構いません。その際は、チャットボックスではなく Q&A ボタンを使って、入力してください。よろしくお願いします。
Perhaps while we are waiting for people to input some questions, just a small question to the UK project. As I told you in the one of my slides, we have a member, Professor Ogawa, who has been working on sperm derivation from the preserved sperm, testis tissue, right? So that area, either ovary or testis, they could be used for the cancer patients, young cancer patients who would like to go through the treatment of cancer, but also preserve their fertility. And so my question is, have you included that activity in your analysis or any kind of project analysis as
Yes, so
IVD
we
or
have,
IVG?
yeah, we have thought about that. I suppose kind of one of the key challenges of that is that that would still require some kind of surgery or removal of the testes from the recipients of the
Yes.
sperm later. And so it raises very similar questions with respect to kind of adolescents and children, and also those who might need to undergo treatment much more quickly. So yes, it's like, it's great that there is like this additional opportunity, but we think that perhaps IVG, in kind of the two senses that we discussed, would overcome a number of the ethical concerns raised by fertility preservation in children.
Thank you. Yeah, for your information, actually in Osaka University, we have another, well, Professor Ogawa is in Yokohama City University, in Yokohama, in the Tokyo area, but we are in the western part of Japan. And Osaka University has another very active researcher. His name is Professor Ikawa. 小口さん、井川さんのファーストネーム何だっけ？
Masato
Ikawa. And he has a big project funded by the government and collaborating with American researchers as well in the field. Sort of a kind of a not a full IVG, but kind of a half IVG. You understand? I think. So our feeling is that that is closer to the clinic than the full IVG, which is still in a quite basic research stage.
Sorry, Masahito Ikawa.
Thank you. Yeah, Masahito Ikawa.
Can I ask a question? I'm really
Sure.
interested in the work that you've been doing with the public. And so I thought it was interesting that one of your members spoke about regulation and sort of the importance of having a regulatory regime to regulate the uses. I wondered, what are the views of scientists on that matter? Because regulation is important, but I can also see an argument or some worries, for example, from the scientific community that it might inhibit innovation depending on how that regulation is designed. So I just wondered, yeah, if you've had any conversations with the scientists about that.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
Impression of regulation, about regulation by scientists.
Yeah. I see the question, but sorry, I don't have a clear idea about that. What do you think, Katsuto?
Okay.
I can tell you, trying to be brief, in a very broader sense, in Japan, scientists are probably similar to any scientists in the world. And they are very cautious, careful about saying we need regulations. However, I have an impression that in the art field, artificial assisted reproductive technology field, because Japan has so many private clinics not regulated by strong law, they feel we need something. So the way the regulation is formulated is important. So simple ban and the strong ban, of course, is not good. But they say we need something. And actually, the voices are becoming stronger these days. Yeah, that's a brief answer.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think, go on.
No, I was just about to say I have a related question, and that is, so what do you think that the reasons are for this lack of kind of a comprehensive regulatory framework in Japan are at the moment? Kind of, How is it the case that this is how it is in Japan? Because obviously it's different in different nations, so it would be quite interesting to hear about why.
That is a highest level bottom line question, and the simple answer is somehow nobody knows. That's a simple answer. But another way of answering it is we are good at making sure the details, Japan's system. But we are therefore, as a result, we are not good at making a big picture activity. And we are consisted of lots of individual activities. And therefore, we are good at industry and the technology, details. But the big picture, you have to say boldly something. But people get nervous about the big picture. Then somebody says, no, that doesn't work. No, that is lacking something. No, that is have to be more polished up and so on. And you do that lots of. And Japan is too big. 120 million people is in one country and governed by one government in Tokyo. Contrary to Australia or Canada, where state system or province system. Yeah, so we have a huge one governing entity. That's probably another reason. Yeah, we can discuss this. It's a very interesting comparative analysis.
I had a question or comment. One interesting issue that you raised is to what extent we could be depending on perhaps longer term reproductive applications, perhaps nearer ones in. For example, you mentioned about should we talk about biological parents and so on. Is an issue now? Is it an issue for later? Is it a more realistic? When we had our workshop earlier this year in Leiden, one thing I was struck by is one of our guests was the CEO of a company which is based in California called Matt, I believe. I hadn't realized until that point how much private investment is going into trying to make relatedness happen, and also other family forms. So I gather that there's a massive amount of private sector resource and money going into that, and according to that speaker, we might be looking at clinical applications within a decade. Believe that's right. So so I don't know whether you had any thoughts on whether that. I mean, maybe that's hype, but
hype.
I was interested that was happening
Sure.
outside.
I have
any thoughts about
opinion,
that? Yeah.
Thank you. First, I should say that what is hype or even some bad thing, too much hype would be probably bad in many ways in any fields. But telling what is really bad or what is acceptable, drawing a line would be extremely difficult. I first have to say that. But the people know that the extreme ones are bad, okay? So that's why we're discussing, and we should discuss it. That's my view. Having said that, I think being very close to the leaders of the world of the IVG field, Katsuhiko and Michinori, they're very, very careful talking about potential clinical application. And there are so many things you can think about that are not yet fully understood. For example, in mice, the reproductive success ratio is 2 or 3%. So that means you see a lots of abnormal fetuses, even within the so-called successful experiments, right? So that is mice, and that's acceptable. But would you really accept it in the clinical research in humans when the ratio of, say, usual ones are 10% or 20%, and then become 2%, meaning lots of abnormal fetuses. And also genomic mutations introduced through the somatic culture and somatic differentiation, that is 100 times more than oocytes, germ cells. And so there are multiple things you could be negative about clinical. So for them, those investment is just not unbelievable. Yeah, but they must have some reasons to go forward. I don't know, actually.
Yeah.
That's my answer.
Yeah. No, I think, I mean, it speaks. I was going to say, it just speaks. You go.
So I was going to say, yeah, we can also note that kind of when it comes to assisted reproductive technologies, we already accept success rates that are far lower than in any other area of And so given that we're concerned about success rates here, it shows just kind of how low they are at this point.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a kind of up to the societal discussions that I know, yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's the importance of having a sound kind of regulatory system, because obviously when you've got people with big hopes, you want to, in a commercial side of the gap.
I think I have a problem of understanding Steve's, not because I am a non-native speaker of English, but also
is it the sound quality?
This is better.
Is that better? Yeah. Okay. Let me start again. Yeah, I think it speaks to the importance of having a clear regulatory system, because obviously when there are commercial incentives to push forward with these technologies, and when there's a market, and when people realizing their dreams, that's where protection is needed. So I think that I think it's a really strong argument for the sector really needs sound protecting parties really, and for fair and transparent information.
Yeah, I believe we can divide the possible future scenarios or situations and more immediate issues, but particularly related to the current basic medical research. And for the future ones, of course, still we can begin discussing today. And I hope things about such as how we view the family and the societal structure, those kind of hypothetical discussions would inform, if something happens in 10 years, 20 years, maybe 30 years even, that will be useful for those activities. I believe so. Still, our view is that it is necessary to perhaps to draw a line a little bit. This is for the future. This is for the immediate issue. Yeah, please. Sorry, that's Lola.
Do you think the discussion around IVG, or do you hope that this will be a catalyst for a broader discussion about introducing regulation in Japan? So not just for IVG, but for IVF. As you mentioned, you have this act from 2020 that is just about donor gametes and embryos, but obviously you've got couples that may go the IVF treatment together, other sorts of treatments. So I'm wondering, are you hoping that this will be a catalyst to sort of to spark that discussion more broadly about regulation in the area?
Atsushi, what do you think?
Um,
I don't want to speak only myself.
Yeah, I completely agree, and that the overall regulatory framework is very important, and we need to embed the IBG technologies into that framework. So as Kazuto mentioned about that, how can I say, overviewing the framework is very important.
Yeah, my comment is that, as I said, Japan is often slow in many things, but it does not mean people are not thinking. People are thinking, and even government officials, when you meet and talk, yes, sensei, teacher, professor, I know that's important, but that's what government officials say in many cases. So the continuous efforts and patience efforts to articulate key issues and key potential solutions would sometime just come together and results in some concrete thing. And others don't lead to anything, but they read it, they see it, and they think about it, and then something happens in some cases. So that's what we hope, particularly because we have the world leader as well as the leader in the clinical side as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's a really good opportunity here to be proactive with your regulation rather than reactive.
Sure.
So, like in the UK, you had your first IVF baby in 83, I think it was. We had ours, Louise Brown, in 78. But we didn't have our regulatory framework till 1990. And then we updated it again in
I see, yeah.
So the law has always been behind the science. Now there's a real opportunity for many countries to get in front, to sort of to be proactive. And you can't future-proof everything, but we can try to sort of formulate a basic regulatory framework for this research. And so, these conversations are happening now in relation to IVG, but also regarding the work that Steve has done. So the Nuffield Council, their working group on cell-based embryo models, they published a report yesterday, proposing essentially what we might do to regulate stem cell-based embryo models in the future. So I think it's a real opportunity, basically, for all countries, isn't it, to be proactive in this area?
Sure, yeah. I think Nicola, please. Yes.
Actually, in the UK, we've also had other publications as well on stem cell-based embryo models. So there was a publication from the Parliamentary Office for Science and Technology last year that sought to brief policymakers on the ethical and policy challenges that this might raise. And so I'm the coordinator for the Ethics and Law Group for the European Society for Human Reproduction and Embryology.
I see, right.
I know that we're having a lot of discussions as well about policies across Europe with respect to emerging technologies.
I see. Yeah. I feel more than before that the world is kind of coordinating without any independent will, but people in different countries are aware of the same issue and the need of discussion and producing some bits of things. And so I do hope that we become a part of such kind of world friends. And despite of the huge challenges of language as well as culture and the lack of professionals in our kind of field, but still I'm trying Yeah. So Atsushi, do you have any question to the UK project?
Okay. It's very simple question. Do you have any plan about empirical studies on public attitude or perception about IVG?
Do you want to take that one, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is no.
No.
I suppose that's not where our kind of expertise lies. So it's one of those things. Definitely, totally think it's do. And if we manage to get further funding for our work going forward, would be great. And that's why we wouldn't necessarily do ourselves. We claim to have that expertise, but it is an incredibly important thing that we need running alongside. I mean, as part of our project more generally, we have been trying to develop sort of pilot methods that could be used in public hospitals. So we haven't said much about it in this presentation. But, one of the things we've been doing is working with designers to sort of on methods which involve creating objects or creating artifacts or
I see.
Fictional websites, that kind of thing, or stories that you can use to engage. We've been piloting that largely amongst ourselves and a professional audience, but that is possible to roll that. I'd quite like to work with somebody else who does have more public engagement. I totally feel in its own right to do that moving forward. So we haven't done it ourselves, and we don't have immediate plans to do it. But I have been involved in one or two projects over the years as a sort of and I would really like to develop that kind of our work with appropriate technical expertise coming in. So yeah, it's so important. I mean, people mention stem cell-based embryo models. I mean, another thing, as well as the Nuffield Council report, another interesting thing last year was Cambridge Reproduction did a really interesting public dialogue on stem cell-based embryo models, which I was a very small part of as a participant. And that was very, very illuminating about what a cross-section of the British thought about it. And I found that really illuminating. They were actually quite positive and quite relaxed about some aspects of it, but did have about its use and so it was interesting what their concerns were, but also fundamentally how supportive they were of the potential of the science, and it was really good. It was really well facilitated, and really good conversation.
Yeah, I don't think Steve mentioned this as well, but we've also been doing some work with corpus linguists on various ethical questions raised by these three technologies. And specifically, we've been looking at public comments on YouTube videos regarding the ethical legal questions raised, and that's led to some quite interesting insights. But yeah, we would be very interested in conducting more empirical work.
I see. What did you say? Corpus analysis? The
corpus linguistics.
Discourse analysis, or kind of?
Kind of, yes. Yeah, so essentially we create like corpuses of comments from YouTube videos, and then we analyze their content with respect to either another video on the same topic or a corpus of kind of general language to see how it differs.
Reina, do you know the method? No.
So just to add, so I think what's distinctive about this corpus linguistics, it uses sort of really big data, so very large language, and specific techniques to analyze it, and language very sort of big data driven thing, as opposed to analysis for sort of by people. So and it reveals patterns that you might not otherwise see merely from thinking and reading. So that's we've been.
Yeah, so one thing to note, for example, is that one of the videos comments that we've been looking at has over kind of 15,000 comments. And by using a computer program to sort that and identify kind of linguistic terms and the focuses of different comments, we've been able to categorize these in much quicker than we would have been able to do if we did it, manually, or even if we could do it manually.
And one interesting project. I mean, we haven't done this yet. Is take that and compare it with what happens when people do a much more facilitated public dialogue or jury scenario. And my personal experience of those is that very, very what you see in people's kind of online comments is
Sorry, it's difficult to hear.
Informed, very, very informed type of debate that really have in these scenarios. So yeah, that's a more systematic interrogation of that is so worth thinking about.
Nicola, maybe you later help us to know this area of activities, please. So I think we have 4 minutes left. Atsushi, is there any concluding question or something you might think about?
Concluding, sorry.
I can tell you a brief comment. I mean, I thought our project G-Step is in the early stage yet, but actually listening to what Atsushi kindly, skillfully presented from our brief period of public panel activity, there are lots of commonalities. The comments by our panel and the issues you've been analyzing and articulating in
exactly.
your presentation in UK team. So that was quite impressive. And so although it's not going to be a formal, tight collaboration, but looking at both activities and thinking, oh, this is really common and that is really common, and this may be specific, and so that is quite intellectually nice and in a way amusing, and I believe this is one of the value that we managed to hold this webinar. I hope that you three felt perhaps similarly to me, and Lola.
Yeah,
particularly
absolutely.
you.
Yeah, it's been so interesting to hear about your work. I think it's fascinating, and I think engagement with the public is so important. And so I think actually hearing some of the findings that you presented has been reassuring for us as well, because the issues we're identifying are also issues that the public are concerned about. And so I think to have that sort of, have things come together like that, I think is reassuring, and it's good to see. Yeah.
Thank you. Lola, are you a philosopher or a lawyer?
I'm a lawyer. Yeah.
I could see it.
Yeah.
Very nice. The Yuko Muraoka that did work, the analysis of history and also policy development, is a lawyer as well.
Who is Nicola? Do you have any comments?
Yeah, I was just about to say, I think that kind of it's really important as well to explore how different countries worldwide are responding to this technology in order really to make sure that our communication about the science as well kind of fulfills the needs of the public with regard to information provision and how that information is framed for them.
Thank you. So do you have any comments or questions?
Steve.
Steve?
Actually,
Yeah.
it's a little difficult to hear you, but please
Right.
give us any concluding remark.
Well, just to agree really with you that it's been fascinating to see the points of similarity, and it's, well, yeah, and I hope we can have further kind of actually about what we're doing, because I think it would be really useful for us to get really more into the detail of what you've done. It sounds so fascinating. So that's been great. And yeah, as I say, particularly given that we're not doing so much stuff now, how it's working in your area. So it's been fantastic, been really good. And rated that my technological issues have marked participation somewhat, but it's great.
Thank you. Yes, maybe sometime next year, at least in the first half or springtime, maybe we can have this kind of conversation. Perhaps again, but with other people in my project. That would be probably very nice. Yeah. So we have about 15 people connected still. Thank you for staying and listen to this conversation. And it's a bit a different style from usual webinar. But I hope all of you, particularly many from Japan, could follow our conversation and also appreciated the value of cross-national, international conversation. And although specific methods we use are not quite the same in common, but still we could illuminate, or we could see the interesting interactions. And so I hope everybody got something from today's seminar. And even though this was a bit of late time for Japan, the early time for UK. And so, Lena, can we close the seminar?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for
we will be in touch. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you for joining us today. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Yeah, have a good evening.
Bye-bye.